It was my sophomore year of college, I think, and I did something I've never done before and I'd never have done since. I sat down to watch ESPN. That's something I've done a lot, but it was to watch a high school basketball game. There was a high school basketball game on ESPN, and it wasn't any connection to me. It wasn't a team that I had seen growing up. It was actually a high school team out of Akron, Ohio. You may know a player who grew up in Akron, Ohio. It was the high school game of LeBron James. And at that point in history, the fever pitch of hype for LeBron was at its peak, to the point where ESPN was carrying his high school game. And so I thought, I have to watch this guy play to see if he lives up to the hype. LeBron was actually, as a junior in high school, put on a Sports Illustrated cover. Could you imagine that? As a junior in high school, and the title they gave him on that cover was The Chosen One. I don't know what I was doing as a junior in high school, but there was nothing about me that was the chosen one. But there was this level of excitement for him, and when I watched him play that game, he looked like a man amongst boys. It was almost like he was playing a different sport. He was so good that a local newspaper, as a middle schooler or early in his high school career, dubbed him the King. As a young kid, he was entitled the King. And I don't know about you, but that would probably go to my head. And that name has stuck. King James is what he is often referred to as. It's his Twitter handle, I'm pretty sure, and it is something he's even trademarked. He's known as King James. Now, there's a lot of views on LeBron James, the basketball player. Some people think he is one of the greatest of all time. If you ask my son, he may even say he's the greatest. And then there's other opinions of who he is. And he's a polarizing figure in a lot of ways. And as I've talked to people, I'm a LeBron fan. And as I talk to people and find out why they don't like him, I'm intrigued by how many don't like him because of his nickname. There have been plenty of people I've talked to that don't like him because he has the nickname of King James. They said when he came onto the scene, they already didn't like him because he hadn't earned anything. So why would you give somebody who hasn't earned a single thing the nickname, the King? And even now, when at 40 years old, LeBron James is still scoring at a high rate. He's an all-star. He was an Olympic gold medalist. At 40 years old, I needed to get these so I could read text. He is an all-star. But even now, people aren't comfortable calling him the King. And I think in part it's because we just don't like giving that type of title to someone. We don't like to say someone is the greatest. Part of LeBron's problem is there's one who came before him who will always be known as the greatest to many, Michael Jordan. But there is this pushback against that title, and it continues today, even though he's broken all kinds of records. Because titles matter, and we have a response when people either are given or kind of claim their own title. And we're going to look in John 19 this morning about that same title, the King, being given to Jesus. And we're going to look at how different people respond to this claim of Jesus of kingship. How do people respond to this idea that Jesus is king? And so to do that, we're going to start in John 19. And we're going to look at these different responses. So I'll read, we'll stop, we'll talk for a little bit, and then we'll keep going. Starting in 19, verse 1, it says, "Then Pilate took Jesus and had him flogged." This is said like a one-line thing, like you're supposed to keep reading. The flogging of Jesus is this violent act where he is whipped to the point of death. That's the start here. If you ever watch The Passion of the Christ, that is a whole arc of that movie. John gives it one verse, but this is where we're at in the story. The soldiers twisted together a crown of thorns and put it on his head. They clothed him in a purple robe and went up to him again and again, saying, "Hail, King of the Jews." and they slapped him in the face. Even in this first part, you can see different king-type language. He's got a crown of thorns put on him, a purple robe, purple being the color of royalty. And they go up to him and say, "Hail, King of the Jews." Now, the Roman soldiers would have heard about Jesus. They would have understood who he was and why he was arrested. They would have understood his claims of king. But they don't just not believe Jesus. That would have been one thing. To say, hey, this guy isn't actually a king, he's kind of crazy. They move well beyond that. Their response to Jesus being king is that they mock him, that they ridicule him. Imagine the scene of a bloody Jesus with a crown on his head, wearing a robe. Them saying, "You think you're our king? You think you're a king? You're below us." To the point where they mock him, "All hail, King of the Jews," and they slap him across the face. They could have just simply not believed. They moved to mock, to ridicule, to trying to embarrass him. That's the first response we see to Jesus being king. But it goes on. Once more, Pilate came out and said to the Jews gathered there, "Look, I'm bringing him, Jesus, out to you to let you know that I find no basis for a charge against him." When Jesus came out wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe, Pilate said to them, "Here is the man." Jesus is still dressed in that kingly attire. As soon as the chief priests and their officials saw him, they shouted, "Crucify, crucify." But Pilate answered, "You take him and crucify him. As for me, I find no basis for a charge against him." The Jewish leaders insisted, "We have a law, and according to that law, he must die because he claimed to be the Son of God." And when Pilate heard this, he was even more afraid, and he went back inside the palace. "Where do you come from?" he asked Jesus. But Jesus gave him no answer. "Do you refuse to speak to me?" Pilate said. "Don't you realize I have the power to either free you or to crucify you?" And Jesus answered, "You would have no power over me if it were not given to you from above. Therefore, the one who handed me over to you is guilty of the greater sin." From then on, Pilate tried to set Jesus free. So next in the story, we really get a good insight into Pilate. Now, Pilate is a confusing biblical character. We actually don't know a lot about the historical Pilate. There's a lot of things people will say about him. They'll say he was a really cruel and violent man. But if you look at the history, we don't really know that. Others will say that he actually worked well with the Jewish people. And I think the picture of him is actually fairly complex. That when the Jewish people were acting the way he wanted them to, he was actually quite kind to them. But the moment they tried to rise up a little bit, that's when Pilate put his foot down. And so he hears these claims of Jesus. In John 18, what we looked at last week, he even asked him, are you the king of the Jews? Jesus' response is, you've heard that. And he says, so you are a king. He is okay with giving Jesus the title of king. But if you notice how he does it, it's always king of the Jews. See, Pilate is fine with Jesus being king, but he wants to minimize it to being just the king of the Jews. Pilate has no problem with Jesus being king of this subservient group of people who are under Roman rule. That's not an issue for Pilate's authority. Pilate is always over him. Listen how Pilate says it. Don't you realize I have the power to set you free? Pilate's okay with Jesus as long as he is always the one who's in power and in control. He doesn't mock like the Roman soldiers do. Pilate, throughout the text, actually seems quite complimentary of Jesus, at least kind. But he doesn't want to attribute kingship to Jesus in any way that would be at his same level. So we have the soldiers mocking, we have Pilate minimizing, and then we jump to the last section. From then on, Pilate tried to set Jesus free, but the Jewish leaders kept shouting, "If you let this man go, you are no friend of Caesar, Anyone who claims to be king opposes Caesar. When Pilate heard this, he brought Jesus out and sat down at the judge's seat in a place known as the Stone Pavement. It was a day of preparation of the Passover. It was about noon. "Here is your king," Pilate said to the Jews. But they shouted, take him away, crucify him." "Shall I crucify your king?" Pilate asked. "We have no king but Caesar," the chief priests answered. Finally, Pilate handed him over to them to be crucified. So now we get the chief priests and the religious leaders of the day, and how are they responding to the kingship of Jesus? They would have understood this idea better than anybody else. They would have understood what Jesus was actually claiming, what was being attributed to him by his disciples, because in the Jewish thought was that a Messiah would come, the anointed one, the chosen one, the Davidic king, the one who would come in the line of David, the greatest king in the Old Testament. One would come who many thought would be an eternal king. And Jesus, of all the titles it seems like he latches onto, one of them is the Messiah, that he was going to be that king. And the Jewish leaders would have understood that. They would have understood much more than Pilate what type of king Jesus was claiming to be. And so how do they respond? Well, they do not have a great relationship with Jesus throughout the whole Gospels, right? And I think it starts at first because they're threatened by the kingship of Jesus. If Jesus really is king, if he's the Messiah, it is going to upend everything. It is going to upend their power. It's going to upend the structures. And Jesus had no problem speaking back to them, claiming authority. And it starts with this threat, these arguments that they would have, but as the Gospels keep going, everything ramps up to the point where they have Jesus arrested. They bring him to Pilate to have him crucified, and it hits a crescendo at a verse I think we can go past pretty quickly, but it's at the end of this section where they say, "We have no king but Caesar." It is easy for us to lose sight of how remarkable it is that they stated that. This is a Jewish people who have a history of being oppressed. The Egyptians, the Babylonians, the Assyrians, it is their story, and now it's the Romans. They had constantly been trying to get out of underneath Rome. That was one of their hopes of what the Messiah would do. And yet at the end of this text, we see them giving their allegiance to Caesar. No one would have expected this a year earlier in the text. But as Jesus continues to rise to power, as that threat continues to be put before their faith, they make choices that lead them to ultimately give their allegiance to a king they did not want. And we see throughout this text how hard it is to respond to the kingship of Jesus in the way that we're called to. And honestly, I don't think it's that different for us today. We have this idealized version that if it was just about Jesus, all of us would love him and want to follow him. There's a quote sometimes attributed to Gandhi. We don't know where it really came from, but with the claim, "I like your Christ, but I don't like your Christians." Other people say things like, "I love Jesus, but I don't love the church." And we could go more and kind of piece apart that, but it's really the first part of that I question. Do people in broader culture really like and love Jesus? I think we like parts of him, the forgiveness, the Jesus in the story of the prodigal sons, we all love that one. But what about the Jesus claiming to be king? What about the Jesus who wants to be king of our lives? Do we really love and like that Jesus? I think the answer is no. And I think we respond quite similarly. I think there are people who, to the claims of king that Jesus has, to the claim of authority on your life, there are people who mock it. It usually starts with a line of something like, Why should I listen to someone from 2,000 years ago telling me how to live my life? I've been blessed to be in the space of college ministry a lot of my life. And I hear people push back on the authority of Jesus in so many different ways to the point where they mock it. And it happens often in different areas, and one of them just in the sexual ethic of Jesus. And the line is like, why should I listen to him? It's my body. Why should he have authority over any of that? And it continues to the point where you mock people who actually do follow that. Jesus' authority isn't loved by most people. In fact, it's mocked by some people. But a lot of us probably don't struggle with mocking Jesus' authority in our lives. We probably do a lot more of what Pilate did. We minimize it. We give Jesus this little area over here. Pilate was fine giving Jesus the Jews to lead. We're good with Jesus getting part of our life. We'll give him Sunday morning. I don't want to wake up some Sundays, but I know, Jesus, you want me to go, so I'll go. When it comes to our finances, we'll give Jesus 5 to 10%. We'll give that, but the other 90 are mine to do with it how I would. We give him control of certain areas, authority over part of our lives. But he's not king over it all. And I think it comes from the fact that we are often threatened by the idea of giving him control. Are there any control freaks out there like me? This is like my sin nature. So as we've been walking through this storytellers thing, and I've been like processing these Kairos moments with the Lord, there's one type of Kairos moment that we talked about. It's this mirror moment. This moment where you are put face to face with who you really are. And often it's the sin in your life. And I have had way too many in the last 2 months that have had to do with my need for control. My need to be the one who manipulates things to get them to go the way that I want them to, and I can't give it over to the Lord. I just had one. We were on a cruise. This is the place where you don't need control. Everybody serves you the whole time. My parents took us on a cruise. It was great. But what cruise companies have started to do is they've bought up islands, and the ship goes to these islands now. And so I want to get out of the ship fast because I'm thinking thousands of people leaving these ships, going to this island. I want a chair so I can relax and read. And I will say that morning, I might have gotten ready faster than the rest of my family. There may have been some conflict, starting with some passive-aggressive comments from me, maybe moving to aggressive comments from me, and to the point where when we're leaving the ship about a half an hour to 45 minutes later than I wanted, I'm downright just a jerk. That's just where I was at. I wanted to be in control. How everyone was acting was not what I wanted, and in that moment, the Lord just floored me. Revealed my sin in a sweet but painful way, but again reminded me of how much I need control. And there are a lot more stories that I don't have time to share about that. So we can feel threatened of losing our own control. But like the Jewish leaders at the end, where they start to give their allegiance to Caesar, we can have the same type of threat to that. Because a lot of us have given our allegiance to other things without knowing it. And to give that up is a threat to us. These have become our places of comfort. They tell us everything we want to hear. We need to be honest. We are surrounded by things that want our allegiance, that want us to act in a certain way, to be approved by them. For you, it might be a group of people. Some friends who you just give them allegiance in your life because you act in a certain way so they approve of you. And when push comes to shove and they want one thing and Jesus would want another, you slowly make excuses to not do what Jesus would have you do. Could be a boss at work who's doing the same thing. It could be a political party. Now, I'm not saying don't be involved in politics, but if you are one of the people who is calling me every single day and spamming my phone, please stop. But political parties don't want you just to vote for them. They want your allegiance. They want you to agree with everything they say, to the point where you say it's okay to mock and belittle people who disagree. They want all of you. So we need to see where we fall in this. How are we responding to the kingship of Jesus? Because what I think is so clear in this text is he is the king we want to follow. We shouldn't want to be in control all ourselves, and we shouldn't want to give our allegiance to anything else, because Jesus is the type of king that we want. Just think through this text, the character that he shows us. How does Jesus respond when he is mocked and ridiculed? Does he lash out? No, Jesus responds in humility. Jesus is a humble king. That's what he shows us. In the midst of people slapping him across the face. Can you imagine being king of the universe and getting slapped across the face? The restraint, the humility that Jesus shows is insane. Paul, in his letter to the Philippians, he quotes what some think is an early hymn or prayer, and in talking about Jesus, he says this. He said he humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on a cross. At the root of who Jesus is, his kingship, is that he is a humble king. It breaks my heart how we have allowed leaders today to live as leaders completely opposite of this. We make excuses for them as they're rude, as they're jerks, as they spread lies. But Jesus gives us a much better king to follow. One who is humble. Not one who is weak, though. We've believed the lie that humility and weakness are somewhat similar. Jesus is humble, but there is nothing weak about Jesus. Think about his interaction with Pilate when Pilate says, "Don't you realize I have the power to set you free?" How does Jesus respond? You would have no power unless it were given to you from above. And in John 18, Jesus said his kingdom was from above. Pilate's no fool. He understands what Jesus is doing there. The authority that you might have only comes through me. See, Jesus is a humble king, but he is also the highest king. He is above everything else. That same passage in Philippians ends by saying this, "Therefore God exalted him to the highest place and gave him the name above every name, that at the name of Jesus every knee should bow in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and every tongue acknowledge that Jesus Christ is Lord." There will be a day when every knee will bow before Jesus. Pilate, the chief priests, Caesar, whoever you think are the leaders today, whether it's political, economic, whatever, every knee will bow to Jesus. He is the highest king. Whatever else we give our allegiance to will one day fail. But Jesus is the highest king. And that's why Jesus wants our full allegiance. He doesn't want us to give it to anyone else. I heard it said that Jesus does not share the throne. He doesn't want to be 1A and 1B with anything. Think of the Sermon on the Mount when he says, you cannot serve both God and mammon or money. Jesus wants the full throne. He wants to be king of your whole life. And he gives us every reason to believe him, to trust him, because he is the one who seeks and saves as a humble king. And he is the one in ultimate authority over everything. So I think we have to ask, how are we to respond? How do we respond to this reality that Jesus is the ultimate king? Because Jesus is the King of Kings. That's who he is. whether people believe false things about him or not, he is the King of Kings. But how are we going to respond? I think the first thing we need to do is we need to honestly ask ourselves, who or what are we giving our allegiance to? Who or what has the throne in our lives? This has been something that's always been important for me to walk through. I think it's so easy to forget how everything wants our heart. That there's these moments where maybe it's just the American dream, that pursuit of comfort that I just want. And that's become what's at the throne of my life. How do I get there? I'll cut a few corners to get there, but nothing too bad. But what's at the throne? What are we giving our allegiance to? And as we do that, then I think we get to the next layer of questions. Am I willing to surrender to the Lord? Because if he is king, and if I give my allegiance to him as king, I'm going to be called to surrender to him. And that is not a word we like very much. We don't like to surrender to anything. But it's inherent in the gospel that we are trusting that Jesus is the one with the good life. I was talking to a student on campus one day, and we walked through the gospel, and it was this beautiful conversation. And his response to why he wasn't able to become a Christian is he's like, I don't think I can surrender my life to Jesus. And I thought, that's a pretty profound thought for someone who doesn't know much about Christianity yet. But he knew, inherent in who Jesus was, that if he was to follow him, he'd have to surrender to him. So where is it hard for you to surrender? Are there plans that you have that when it really comes down to it, you're holding them like this? It's hard to surrender to Jesus with tight fists. We have these things that have to go a certain way, and then once that happens, then I'll follow Jesus more. So what is hard for you to surrender? And that probably gets to the last part. What do you need to give up control of? What are those areas of your life that you try to control so much that you really struggle to give Jesus lordship over that area? One of the areas that this gets to me every time is in parenting. I struggle to give up control of how my kids are going to grow up. I think that if I just manipulate things the right way, if I respond to them the right way, they're going to turn out to be great kids. And as I look at it, all the pressure is on me. I'm trying to control everything, and this has produced very little good fruit. Because I get more and more frustrated when they don't do what I want. I get more and more anxious of, are they actually going to turn out to be good humans? Because it's all about me and me controlling their world. But that's not how we were meant to live. I think so much of our frustration and anxiety stems from feeling like we need to be king over everything, over other people's actions, over things turning out the way that we want. What would it look like for us to be people who give control to the King of Kings? I trust that as I even share that, you have things popping into your head that are the hard things for you to give up control of. And my encouragement would be is to actually talk to somebody about this stuff. Because it's easy to hear it now and be like, oh, there's an area that I need to trust Jesus with. Then move into the next worship song, go into the lobby, have some great coffee, and then drive home and move on to the next thing. But what would it look like for us to really engage those areas? Those areas that we're giving allegiance to something other than Jesus, those areas that we are struggling to surrender, those areas that we are struggling to give up control. What would it look like as a body of believers for us to press into those? To go in day by day with the belief and with the action that Jesus is our King over everything. and we want to give him control. Let me pray. Jesus, we thank you so much that you are a good king. You have given us every reason to trust you, and yet we try to do it on our own. Lord, would you help us be a people who humbly repent of those times where we take control, who desire to surrender our lives to you, who trust in your goodness and your grace, and who live lives surrendered to our King. Amen.